Welcome to Belonging at the Top, driving performance through people. The podcast where leadership gets real and people come first. Your hosts are Dr. Natalie Parks, psychologist, behavior analyst, best-selling author, and your go-to expert for dismantling systems of injustice while building equitable, high-performing teams. And Anthony Butler, leadership coach, thought leader, speaker, and master of helping leaders unlock their team's full potential, one breakthrough at a time. Together, they're here to tackle your toughest leadership challenges with just the right mix of science, strategy, and a sprinkle of humor. In this episode, we explore the movie adaptation of Wicked, exploring its unique casting choices, the broader implications of belonging versus fitting in, and why simply fitting in might be holding your team back.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. As we mentioned, we are talking about Wicked and all of the things that came with Wicked. Wicked, the movie, is really what we're going to be focused on today, as opposed to Wicked, the musical. And there's some key reasons why. In the movie Wicked, the casting for everyone is much different than traditionally who has been cast for the musical, and we want to dive into a little bit about what those dynamics might look like or what they are, how we interpreted them, and all of that. So thanks for coming and hanging out with us for a bit, and we are going to jump it off.
Yeah.
Tony, anything to add?
Yeah. The other reason is I haven't seen the play. So how about that?
I haven't either. That's important too. Let's not talk about things we haven't seen.
Exactly. Which we probably have done before, but not in this format.
Right. So first thing that came to mind for us when thinking about Wicked and calling out for, if you haven't watched it, go watch it. It's now streaming and so available to everyone.
Yep.
One of the things that the key things is it's the backstory of the Wizard of Oz and how the Wicked Witch of the West became the Wicked Witch of the West and how Glinda became the Good Witch. And one of the striking things that we know is that the Wicked Witch of the West is green, and no one else is green in the movie. She is the only green person, but also the woman who plays it is a British woman of African descent. And so when we talk about kind of the backdrop in the landscape and what that really means, those are things to really think about as we're talking about what does it mean to belong or fit in, which is our first question. What is the difference between belonging and fitting in?
I think that's critical too. I think we talked about the casting. I mean, from my understanding, I don't think there has been an African-American woman who's played Elphaba on the stage show, on the play. So I think this is the first time. So we could probably spend a whole other session talking about, was it a conscious casting decision? Other than the fact of the pure talent that she has as a singer, but was there a conscious decision to intentionally cast someone who was of a non-dominant culture? I won't even say African-American, but someone of a non-dominant culture in that role, which I think helps for the performance, because that person probably can relate to some other themes that come out in the actual play itself. Maybe not. I may just be adding on, but I think that it does help. Right. And I think that's what gets to that issue of, are we belonging? Are we fitting in? I guess we should probably determine, do we describe or define what we mean by each one at this point? But I would say the difference between them, and we put it that way. So I'm not going to speak down or do any mansplaining, but I think the difference between belonging and fitting in is really a true sense of camaraderie, and sense of some psychological safety, that I am there and I am welcome there and I can challenge the system. So that will be belonging, versus for me, fitting in is I get along to get along, right? I'm not going to rock the boat. I'm there because I want to be accepted, but I'm not comfortable enough to really challenge anything that's said, right or wrong, but I can't really voice myself or use my authentic voice. I kind of curb my authentic voice if I'm fitting in, because I don't want to be othered in any kind of way. So that's the approach that when I hear we come up with this question, that's my framework is what's the difference between the two, and why is that important?
Right. I agree with that. And I actually think about a time when I lived on the West Coast and was working at a place that was filled with really great people, really wonderful people. And I used to often say, everyone here is really amazing. They're great people. They're really good to me, but I feel like a fish out of water.
Mm-hmm.
And so I could get along, but they weren't my people, so to speak.
Right.
And I think that is the difference between belonging. You feel like you're with your people. You're totally comfortable. You can show up and do everything that you want to do. Whereas fitting in, you may recognize that you're surrounded by really amazing people, but you still feel not quite right in some sort of way.
Right. And I think in the movie, that's where look at Glinda and her crew or her right. I think for the most part, her crew is really just fitting in. I don't think they feel accepted at
Yeah.
all. So when you look at all the isms that are represented by her crew, and then you look at Glinda, who's I guess supposed to be the it girl on campus or in their social scene, but her friends don't reflect that. Her friends, I use air quotes, don't really reflect the same kind of visual appearance or even a social what's the best word I'm looking for? A like they fit in. They fit in with her. Like they go along with her, right? But you don't get
Right.
the sense of that they feel like that they actually belong in the situation. Then you have
Yeah.
Elphaba, who embraces the fact that she doesn't belong or doesn't fit in, but doesn't let that alter how she views people and how she interacts with folks when she goes on her day to day.
Right. And I think what you're touching on with Galinda and her friends, I think also Galinda, who becomes Glinda, I think she's fitting in as well. So she's
Mm-hmm.
kind of seen as this trendsetter, and everyone is, or her quote unquote friends are trying to be like her and going along with what they think she will accept or want or like. But she in turn is doing the same thing,
Right.
right? And so there was that uh, situation where she had this hat from her aunt. It was the black hat,
Mm-hmm.
and her friends made fun of it, picking up on maybe her saying this hat is hideous or whatever phrase she used to describe the hat. And then it was her friends who came up with, oh, you should give it to Elphaba. And there was a moment where it at least seemed as though Galinda was like, why would I do that? But then she's now in turn trying to fit in with her friends. And it becomes this cycle of we're all doing stuff to try and be accepted by the other person. And none of us are really showing up as we are.
Exactly.
And I think the interesting thing is Alpha, the only one that actually accepted Glinda as she was
Yep.
and allowed her to be who she was.
Right. And I think that's you'll find it in the workplace too. When you have an environment where belonging does not exist, but everyone seems to get along and they fit in, they do what is acceptable versus what is the right thing to do. And I think that's one of the characteristics you can see in an environment when you're looking at the culture in your workplace, the culture of your teams, are people that's doing the things that are socially acceptable, that are acceptable by the culture of the organization, or are they really challenging that and really showing their true selves and how they show up at work versus I'm going to do it this way because that's what everybody expects me to do, which is what a Galinda would do. Even as someone who's looked at as a leader of the crew, she still doesn't belong to the crew. She fits in because she's playing a role that everybody expects her to do because of the role she's been assigned in their little social construct.
Right. Well, and when we think about leadership and organizational structure, people who are promoted most quickly to leadership positions are typically the people who are fitting in,
Right.
who are going with the flow, who are not challenging status quo, who are quote unquote adopting the culture and traditions of the organization. And so, one red flag that I often see when I'm consulting with organizations is when people are talking about hiring someone new and they're looking at a quote unquote cultural fit. Are they really looking for somebody who's just going to come and blend in? Or are they recognizing that they want somebody who might challenge the status quo because we know that those challenges actually make things better?
Right. And I think that kind of actually leads us to our next point that we want to talk about is like comparing a shared purpose to what belonging is, right? What happens when the focus is fitting in? So if you're a new employee and you come in and you see that those who fit in get promoted faster within the organization, what happens culturally in a team or an organization when that becomes the focus?
Yeah, I think One of the biggest things that I've seen is you tend to get people who are, I heard this term recently repeated over and over again, keep your head down and do your job.
Yep.
And so people are attempting to almost fly under that recognition late radar in that I'm doing the same thing the other person is doing. Ultimately, what it does for the organization, if everybody is so focused on being the same, you're going to lose out on innovation. You're going to lose out on problem solving. People may even not speak up when they see a problem because nobody else is speaking up. And if I'm trying to fit in, Anthony's not saying anything. So maybe I thought it was a problem, but maybe it's not really a problem.
Right.
So people might even start second guessing themselves.
Exactly. And I think you see it. An example for maybe our listeners is when you see some of the professional athletes who start to speak out on social issues and they're told to shut up and dribble, right? I
Yep.
think that's the same type of thing. Like, no, you were hired to do a certain thing. We don't want to hear your voice. That's not what we watch you play. We don't want to hear what you have to say. We want you to, shoot, score some points. So I think you can make that same analogy in the workplace as well, is that you have people who probably want to speak, who have ideas, who have constructive criticism for their organization. And let's be clear, I don't mean, we're not supporting folks who are just negative just to be negative, who will always have some kind of gripe about the organization, but never put any effort or time into a resolution. That's not who we're talking about now. We're talking about the people who really have and care about the work that they're doing, the work the organization is doing, the work the team is doing, but don't contribute because of that lack of belonging in the organization. And let's call it what it is, the fear that if you speak up, that something you're going to be a negative repercussion or negative consequence in the organization. So as a leader, which we hope you guys are listening, is that you want to make sure that you're creating an environment where those people who do care, who are looking at the value of their work and the quality of their work, that they have that sense of acceptance so they can bring those ideas to the forefront to help the team, the product, become better at whatever you're doing as an organization.
Yeah, I think the only other thing that I might add to this is I was thinking about, when you are trying to fit in, and we see this happen a lot in people who are from underrepresented groups in the organization.
Mm-hmm.
And there's some research out there that actually says if you are in a group that is less than 25% of the whole, then you adopt and adhere to kind of cultural norms and rules even stronger than the majority group. And what we've seen sometimes is, let's just say I am a woman. We won't just say that, but if I'm a woman that is in a male dominant workplace, and all of the sudden you hear me being more critical of a potential woman who's going to be hired, or saying something like, let's not dumb things down and let these women come in here and mess stuff up for us.
Right.
There's that sentiment of like, I have made it, I now fit in, but I still see other people who share some identity characteristic with me as different.
Yeah.
And as potentially screwing up the good thing that I've figured out.
Right.
And I think that is characteristic of that fitting in as well.
Yep. And definitely if you find yourself in a non-dominant situation where you're, no matter where it is, that it's common, it happens. I think it's human nature to kind of protect what you've got versus right, looking at, all right, what else, what can I do to make it better? It's like, no, I'm not going to rock the boat. I mean, it's good here. I got my good benefits. Everybody likes me here. I'm cool. I got friends at work. I don't want to rock the boat. I don't want to do anything that's going to jeopardize my station with bringing in other non-dominant people. Right. So it sounds counterintuitive, but I think that's something that as a leader, the challenge is to avoid that. Right. We got to start figuring out a way on your team, and however you do it, is to unite around the values of whatever the organization is, what your mission is, whatever product you're doing, what service you're providing. That it's hard to pivot then from everybody that's doing their job and everybody's getting along to uniting around something else, so that those other ideas start to surface and people are able to then communicate and articulate some of those new ideas, challenge some of the status quo. Again, not in a negative, overbearing way, but in a way that really helps your organization. And the way you do that as a leader, I guess this would be a practice tip. would be to focus on the values of the organization and what you're doing, as opposed to focusing on necessarily performance measures or something else. But why are we doing the focus on the why? Like, why are we doing this? What's the point?
Right.
And I think that's where leaders can start to pivot from folks just fitting in to folks feeling like they belong and are part of something bigger than just their solitary or their single job function.
Right. I think the other thing is also focusing on the specific behaviors. So if we're all focused on the why, then we're more likely to see people contributing new ideas or asking questions about a plan to either gain better understanding or to offer better solutions,
Right.
right? Not to complain. So, as a leader, if you're finding that your teams are always just blanket agreeing with you, chances are you are not fitting in. And so, even asking questions that signal the expectation for disagreement.
Right.
So, what holes are there in this plan? Give me a couple strategies that might make this even better. What questions do you have? Those are all ways of asking those questions
Yep.
that signal I'm not supposed to just say, yeah, this is great. I'm
Right.
supposed to actually challenge a little bit in this moment. And so maybe that's another kind of workplace tip for leaders
Yep.
is pay attention to how we're questioning.
And not only, but and I think it probably starts before the questioning. I think so. I was reading an article the other day that really the biggest thing is that for that leader has to be transparent, and a leader has to be somewhat vulnerable themselves, right? So it's admitting
Yeah.
when you make mistakes, like, hey, I thought this was going to be a great idea. It didn't work out that way. The data doesn't support it. I was wrong, right?
Right.
But doing that in a way that the team sees it, the team hears it, so that you are modeling that behavior, so that you can get folks. Because the other thing you don't want folks burying their mistakes, because we can't fix something that if we don't know it's broken. So if your team members are
Right.
doing something that's wrong, they're not getting it done right, but they are afraid to say how they messed up because they're focusing more on fitting in and being accepted versus actually making it better. They're not going to be willing to say anything that's going to damage their station or how they fit in. But if you create that
Right.
environment as a leader that says, I was wrong, this didn't work, that was a bad hire, that was a bad policy, I calculated this wrong, whatever applies to your situation, to your industry, be willing to, and almost make it a requirement for yourself, be intentional about being public about your mistakes as a leader, so that your team sees that, so they can, and then you starting to create that environment where it's acceptable and okay and expected for you to own up to your mistakes, but using your mistakes as a learning tool, not to denigrate or to deride somebody, but say, hey, I messed up, it didn't work, we got to figure out a different way to do this. How do we move forward? And then start asking those questions, right, that you were just talking about.
Right.
I think that's probably the kind of the precursor. You can't if you just come and start asking questions, but you haven't done the work beforehand, folks are still going to be like, no.
Hey, listen, everyone, I am
Right.
always right. But what questions do
Right.
you
I'm
have?
always right.
What
Everybody,
holes do you
as soon as
see?
you ask a
Right.
question, they're on their phone, like, I don't know who
I'm
he
looking
expects.
down. Don't make eye
Yeah,
contact.
exactly. Nobody, they don't have that sense of it's an accepted behavior. Or if they haven't seen that behavior in the team, if they haven't seen
Right.
you exhibit the behavior, if they haven't seen their colleagues exhibit that behavior, that person who's just fitting in is not going to volunteer answers
That's
to
true.
those questions in as much as you want to. And that's when you have those meetings where everybody is sitting there twiddling their thumbs, not really speaking up, when you really want it to be
Right.
kind of a working session and brainstorming to kind of get things through. And I think that's something
Yeah,
that
that's a really good point.
yeah, if you don't model that behavior and you're not being vulnerable and transparent as a leader, you're not going to be able to pivot from a culture of fitting in to a culture of
Right.
belonging, if you're not willing to do that yourself as a leader.
Right. Yeah, that I think it also signals, that these things that we're talking about are not innate qualities within a person, right? They're all things that somebody has to learn.
Yep.
And so if you have a team that has been focused on fitting in, and truth be told, you can have an organization that has established a belonging culture and get someone new in the doors, and likely they are going to need some time to learn these new behaviors,
Right.
because truth is, we have a whole lifetime of kind of fitting in, right? And we have a whole lifetime of, when even go back to your elementary school days, the goal was not to challenge your teachers.
Hmm.
The goal was to accept what they said and do what they said and get your work done, right? Kind of keep your head down and do what is told of you. And so we are working against that pattern.
Yep.
And like you said, if in order to learn a new behavior, you have to see it
Right.
first. So if the leaders aren't doing it, you can preach it all day long, but it's never going to stick.
And the reality is that we've got hundreds of years in this country of successful businesses that did not have a culture of belonging, right?
Right.
And so they got a culture of getting it done,
Right.
getting the work done, put your head down, nose to the grindstone type of behaviors and thoughts of actually being productive and performing well. And I think what the studies are showing now is that if you look at really high performing teams, one of the critical qualities that they all have is that there is a sense of belonging among that team. So it's only when
Right.
academics like yourself start to study that, right, and we start to see like, oh, that's one of those things that's missing. Like you can still have high quality, highly capable people, but what makes them perform better or even better than what they are doing now is when you are when you have that sense of belonging on your team. So again, we're not saying, or at least I'm not saying, that you don't, just because your team doesn't have belonging to mean you're not going to succeed. Not saying that at all. But if you want to push your team forward and do
Even
more
further.
and to do better and to create a space where people want to come to work and they value what they do and they're willing to contribute to help you and your organization do better, then I think belonging has to be a key part of it. And as a leader, you've got to be intentional about creating that environment and modeling that behavior.
Right. Well, and I think we also have to recognize that while there have been companies for hundreds of years that have been successful without cultures of belonging, we do have some generational changes,
Mhm.
and I think much larger generational changes than we have had in the past as it relates to
Right.
the workforce.
Yep.
Technology has sped up the rate at which culture changes. And we now have people entering the workforce and who are in the workforce who are much more focused on what value do I bring. So, what is the why behind the work that I'm doing? What is the vision of my team, of my organization, of my specific position? And I'm quite frankly not going to work and not work well if I don't feel I belong and I don't feel I'm contributing towards the shared vision.
Right.
And so I think it will be interesting. I won't be around for it, but in 100 years, for somebody to kind of look back and say, society and culture changed in this way, and we saw this generation of people coming in with a different set of values, so to speak. And did we find that organizations that embrace belonging versus organizations that were like, we've been doing it this way for 100 years and we've been fine, if we also saw that shift?
Right.
Because I think we're seeing that shift.
Yep.
And I think in 50 years, probably even far less than that, belonging is going to matter much, much more organizationally than it does even right now.
Yep. And I think that ties us to our next point is that it's a journey. It's not going to happen over time. Right. So I think that's your analogies of 50 to 100 years probably going to be more condensed than I think it'll be happening faster than that.
Right.
It's happening now, especially as we start looking at the cultural work and hybrid working and working from home, everything else. All of those things play into it, whether it be politics, technology, culture, and newer generations are expecting different things from the work experience. So I think that's something that, especially us of older generations, it's definitely a journey for us. We're on a continuum. Like a lot of it we don't know. I think the
Right.
difference is younger generations who are also in the workforce are expecting it now. And so that's I think really the balance is that you'll hear younger folks saying, oh, well, I can't be my authentic self at work. I'm like, no, there's some stuff you're doing at work that you shouldn't be doing at work versus older generations are like, hey, let's get it done. We want everybody to get along. So it's merging those two. And I think the way you get that done in an effective way is through belonging, but it's going to be a journey because you've got folks learning about each other, dealing with the constant change in technology around, and depending on what industry you're in, it can be faster or slower, depending on what you do and what you as an organization. But I think that's the key thing is that as a leader, that don't expect this to happen overnight. Don't expect
Right.
to listen to this podcast, have your HR team bring somebody in or conduct a training on themselves or what belonging and psychological safety means. And then the following week, everybody's going to be getting along and you're going to be much more advanced in your
Whole new
organization.
team.
Right. It doesn't work that way. It is anything that you are going to invest in your people is going to take time. This is no different. And I think for probably the hardest thing for leaders, especially older leaders, is to realize that in order for belonging to work in your organization, it's going to start with you. And so a lot of that work that has to be done is going to be self-development of work that you as a leader have to intentionally do and model, like we said earlier, that your employees then kind of buy into because they see you doing it, and they see that some of the braver employees or their colleagues are stepping up and doing the same thing, and they think, oh, it really is a culture where I can express an opinion, well-informed opinions. Don't come with your crazy ideas with no data, right? So you still got to do the work, but you should be able to express those opinions, express those ideas, bring those new concepts to the table, or challenge the existing ones, but in a way that makes sense, that's smart, but again, around the point of making the organization better. But it's going to take time. It's going to take time.
Well, and understand that you're going to make missteps and do things wrong. And I think that goes back to the point that you made, is recognize those and call them out, right? So, there may be a meeting where somebody offers an idea and I glaze over it because I'm focused on other deadlines or something else that's happening.
Right.
And maybe I think about it after the meeting's over. Well, guess what? Next time you all are there, you can actually call out that and say, I want to revisit this. It took me a minute to recognize and let it sink in, but I'm going to hold space for that. Right. So, quickly, kind of what now, right? We've talked about a lot of things. We're centered around belonging, and we used Alphaba and Glenda from Wicked as our kickoff. But if I'm a leader and I am saying, okay, I recognize that I have this fitting in culture, what are some first things that I can do that are, practical things that I could maybe do even later on today?
Right. So I think one of them is, we've already kind of talked about, is create that space, right? So by modeling the behavior, you want to show that it's accepted behavior in the workplace, that this is what you expect of your team members as well, but give them the time and the space and the grace to do that. So you're allowing mistakes to happen, in a reasonable way, but you're allowing a discussion about those mistakes. You want people to talk about it. You want people to talk about their new ideas. And I think, I keep going back to the mistake comment because I think that's critical as well. New ideas are always great, but that's not what a true sense of belonging means. You can also talk about what you did wrong and what you learned from that, and how the team can benefit from the learnings from your mistakes as well. So I think that's one, creating that space for both new ideas and a discussion around, and the vulnerability around owning and being accountable for mistakes and what you learned from them. I think that's a key way to start.
Yeah, I love that.
Yep.
I think the second thing is celebrating wins together. And I'm going to add that a win is somebody sharing a mistake, right? I keep thinking about, as we're talking about, like, share mistakes. When you are in a culture where mistakes cannot be shared, you don't find out about problems until they're really, really big problems.
Right.
And nobody wants to actually deal with those really, really big problems, right? So celebrating the wins together, but also celebrating recognition of problems at the start of those problems, as soon as the error was made, as opposed to, people keeping it quiet down the line. And the more that we can celebrate people speaking up and sharing new ideas and sharing when they've made a mistake, the more it's going to happen.
Right. And then key to all of that is you got to be able to do it with some grace and some empathy. I think we could probably do a whole separate show on empathy and its role in the workforce, and especially with belonging.
Absolutely.
But you got to have a space of understanding where people are coming from, why they did what they did, and how that drives their decision-making process, and being able to again, emulate that, to model that behavior, showing what empathy looks like, so that your employees and your team members really do feel like you, even if you don't understand it, you at least are trying to understand, at least you care about what that impact is on them and how they're doing in the workplace. But I think that is an underlying thing kind of throughout all of that, is that this only works if you have some empathy. Like, you can't create a culture of belonging if you don't have a base of empathy to kind of begin with. So that would be my final point. I think that's a great way for folks to kind of look at this and understand what they can do to really start to implement some of this stuff in their day-to-day life at work.
Yep. I agree with that. I think that is a great place to leave it.
Yep.
Thank you all for tuning in, and until next time.
Until next time.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Belonging at the Top. We hope it sparked new ideas for fostering belonging in your leadership journey. If you found it insightful, please like and subscribe to our podcast for more thought-provoking discussions. We'd also love it if you could share it with others who might benefit from the conversation. If you have any feedback or topics you'd like us to cover in future episodes, please email us or drop us a note on Instagram or LinkedIn.